Hey everyone, welcome to the sew along for the zero waist pleated skirt pattern. I'm just going to take you through the pattern step by step, start to finish, and give you an idea of how it all goes together. Right, I've got my pieces cut out, so I know it's probably quite annoying that both sides of this fabric are the same, but this is the colour the kiddo will wear, so this is the fabric we're making it out of. This is a lightweight sort of synthetic suiting, and this is the right side. So we've got the pleats marked across here. I've got this piece marked just here with the B to let me know that that's the back, likewise with the front, and there's the waistband. So you mark and cut everything from the front side of the fabric. I realise that gets you these markings then are on the right side of the fabric, and we'll have to transfer those over to the wrong side of the fabric later on. But if you want to mark those originally on the wrong side of the fabric, just remember to turn your pattern piece over. So if you're marking it on the wrong side of the fabric, you'll need to flip your pattern piece over so that it's printed side down, or else you'll end up with this portion here which has the elastic on the front of the waistband of the skirt. So I just mark everything from the right side and then I transfer those over to the back. I have gone ahead and attached the fusible interfacing, so on the back side of the waistband and for the zip on both the front and the back there. So we'll just get straight into pinning the pleats, and I'll show you how that works. On the pattern there are arrows marked on the pleats to show you from which side to which side you need to fold them. So I haven't marked those on here, but they all go in that direction. So for both pieces, which means when you're on your back piece, the pleats are facing away from the zip, and when you're on your front piece, they're facing towards the zip. But basically, they just go in the same direction all the way around the skirt. If you fold them in the opposite direction, you end up with the centre pleat not being in the centre of the skirt. So make sure you note the direction that they need to go in on the pattern pieces, and go from there. So the arrow on the pattern piece is going from this side pointing to there. So you take this here and pinch it along that line and line that line up directly with that one. Now this fabric's a bit bouncy because it is a stretch woven, and it's a bit thick with suiting, but you can see the two are lined up there. Put a pin in there and then make sure the bottom's lined up, and I put a second pin in to make it easier to top stitch in place. Now when I'm top stitching, and after I take this pin out, I find this pulls apart like this, and you'll end up with the bottom of your pleat like that. So what I like to do to stop that from happening is I line up the bottom of the pleat there, fold this down a little bit further, not a bent pin, I'll try the straight one, and I pop that one in like that. So that way it holds the tail end in here in place while I'm top stitching down there. So then you just go ahead and pin all of those in exactly the same way. Take the pleat, that edge, line it up, pop some pins in through all three layers. You will notice that the pleats aren't straight down, they're tapered like this. That's what actually makes the shape in the skirt, and it means we don't have to taper the sides, and it can be a zero waist pattern. But if you make them straight, you will end up with the skirt not fitting. So make sure you take note of the angle and just follow the marked lines, and you will be all good. Alright, I'll just pin the rest of these and I'll be back in a moment. So there we are, all pinned up and ready to go. I'm just going to head over to the sewing machine now. Here we are with our, I think this is the front piece. So I've got the interfacing for the zip just there. I had missed this step earlier, so I've just quickly gone and finished the edges around the outsides of the two skirt bits. And we're going to pick up where we left off in sewing the pleats down. So again, we're working from the right side of the fabric. This is the pleats that you've pinned. You can see the two lines lined up there, and I can see here, you might not be able to see from the angle, but I can see the bottom of the marking right there. So I'm going to just go as close as I can to the edge, down to that point, just with a straight stitch. Okay, and then you can just back stitch there, but I like to spin it around and just do a couple of stitches back and forward, and you get a little T on the bottom there. And then just repeat that for your other 9 pleats. So now we have both our front and back pieces with the pleats sewn in and pressed down. We want to place the two together right sides facing, and we're going to sew the side seam with the zip. So this side seam has a 1.5 centimetre or 5/8 seam allowance. That's to allow for the zip installation. That's something to be mindful of. Basically, we're just going to pin this together. If you see there, that's the marking for the bottom of the zip. So I want to make sure I've got a pin right there to remind myself that's when I need to stop from doing basting stitches to doing the regular length stitches for the bottom half of the seam. Okie doke. Alright, so starting at the top, I've got my stitch length set to its longest length for basting, and I'm mindful that I've got a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. I'm not going to back stitch at the top because I will just want to be able to pull these stitches out without issue. Take that guy out of there. Whoops. Concentrate a bit harder than me and don't sew over pins. Right, this is where we are. This is the marking for the bottom of our zip. So when I get to there, I'm going to take a few stitches to essentially back stitch at the start of this seam down here, because we don't want it to come unravelled when we undo the top basted portion. And then just change the stitch length to the regular stitch length, and continue down to the end of the seam. And finish as per usual. I'm just going to nip over and press this seam flat just like that. Okay, so as you can see there, I've just pressed the seam open and flat, and then we're going to install the zipper. So this is the 15 centimetre zipper for the larger sizes. Hope you can see that there. And we're going to place it, so this is the way the zip normally goes towards the outside. We're going to place that face down onto the seam allowance. You want to make sure that the top of the zip pull is 1 centimetre down from the top of the fabric, from the raw edge up top. Normally that means that there's just a little bit protruding over the top and that the zip is centred. Now you can use wash away wonder tape or pins, or you can baste this in place. I am a bit of a loose cannon, so I just pin and deal with the consequences, I suppose. So I'm going to be sewing down this side around and up the other side, so I'm going to place the pins on the other side of the zip in the other direction. Again, that's playing things fast and loose and can lead to the two sides of your zip sewn in different directions. Can lead to slight amount of pulling. And if you wanted to avoid that, you could sew down this side, finish at the bottom, and then sew down that side and across the bottom, and you would have, well, basically the seam lines pulling, or the feed dogs on the machine pulling in the same direction on both sides. I am not that particular. Okay, so I've changed to a zipper foot, and here's our zip pinned in. You're wanting to sew straight down the centre of the zipper tape, just there, starting at the top. It can be a bit tricky to get past the zip pull, so you just sometimes have to ease it past the zip pull. Trying to keep things on track. And then you're away. And technically you could unzip it a little, sew down and zip back up again, but with it sewn closed at the front, that's a little awkward to do, so I opt for just easing it past the zipper pull. And down the side, make sure you've passed the metal end of the bottom of the zip so you don't sew that, because that can cause problems. Just a little further there. Just around. Better. And again, at the top you may need to wriggle around and ease past the end of the zip pull there. Okay. So that's what that looks like on the back. And then when you flip it around, and after you've finished sewing, you take your seam ripper and take out the basting stitches. Down to where you started your down to where you started the rest of the seam. And you have your functioning zipper. So the next step then is to sew. You've got your zipper installed on this side. You're going to sew the side seam on the other side. So again, take the two sides of your skirt, right sides facing, line up the side seam, and pin in place. This side seam only has a 1 centimetre or a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so just the same as the rest of the skirt. Just going to give that a quick pin. And sew down there. Okay, so the next thing we're going to tackle is the waistband. As I mentioned earlier, the markings are on the right side, they need to be on the wrong side. So all I do to transfer them across is just use a pin. It's going to be marking my dart points there. And then on each side here. That way we can then fold that in half along the line of the dart. Just like that. And pin it in place. I'll grab a ruler to do this in a second, but the dart goes from the corner there down to that dart point and back out to the other side. You can see that there. I'll be sewing down there and down there. I've got the other markings I've got on here that need to come through is this one here, which is the marking for where to sew your elastic on when you want to sew it to the inside. So I'm just going to mark that there so that I know where to sew it. I'm actually going to sew this, which is the buttonhole, from the right side, so those markings are fine there. Okay, so for the dart we'll just start at one end. Sew down to the midpoint, pivot, and back out to the other side. And then we just clip just here to make it easier to press, not all the way to the stitching, but just a little clip like that so that when we fold it, it will press easily. Then we're going to come over here and sew this buttonhole. Now most modern machines will have a buttonhole foot, something that looks like that, and that you can sew your buttonhole with. They all have a different system for that, so just check out your manual, sew your buttonhole, and I shall meet you back here. So there we have our buttonhole, and our dart is sewn and pressed. Now we're going to go over and do the waistband pressing. So what we need to do is press the waistband in half, like that, all the way along, and then we want to press one long edge down. So the one that you want to press over is the one that has the notch on it. But I think it's called the front side waistband notch, and that's that one there. So press that long edge over all the way along. It's the edge opposite. It's the edge opposite the side that has the buttonhole on. Okay, so we're pressing in half and then one long edge down. So now with the pressing done, you can see we've got it pressed down the centre with one end pressed under. This is what the side seam dart looks like when it's all pressed down. that, and down to the other end. And then it's the opposite side where you have the buttonhole and the marking for where you place the other end of the elastic. At this point, this is where we're going to attach our elastic to the inside here and then feed it through our buttonhole. Before we attach our elastic to the waistband, we just need to finish the raw edge. So just turn it under a couple of times and then stitch it down. It's going to be awkward. I like to do a thing where I put my stitch length to 0 and my stitch width to as wide as it goes, and then I change my stitch to a 3-step zigzag, and then you can stitch the end down and you don't have to argue with your feed dogs. So now what we want to do is attach this piece of elastic on the inside here and feed it out through that buttonhole. So there's the marking for where this needs to be attached. I'm just going to fold that under. Okay, and then making sure this is straight, feed it through the buttonhole at the other end. Okay, so now we're going to attach the waistband to the skirt. So got my little marking here that's reminding me that this is the front. The other thing to remind you is this is on the wearer's left hand side, so it's on your right hand side when you're looking at it like this. This is the end that is at the front, and we're going to be attaching it to the inside first. So we'll open out the waistband and have the right side of the waistband facing the wrong side of the skirt. I'm just going to turn that round so you can see the inside of the skirt here, inside of the waistband. Now this marking is to line up with the raw edge, like that. And to make sure I've got my waistband distributed evenly around the top of the skirt, even though it should fit precisely. If you've had any small deviations on your pleats, it's not going to fit exactly, so check now to make sure it is and see if you need to make any adjustments. But the dart in the waistband lines up with the side seam. You can see we're lining up pretty well there. I'm just going to throw a few more pins in to keep things in place. Right, and then continue around the waistband. Pinning it to the other side. Now this end should be as 1 centimetre past the edge. So 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch past the edge there. So when the end of the waistband is sewn up, it's flush with the edge of the zip. Now, and just do the same thing on this side. Throwing in a few extra pins to keep things lined up. And then we are going to head over and sew it on. So just using a regular straight stitch and a 1 centimetre seam allowance, sew the waistband that you've pinned on to the top of the skirt all the way around. So there you've got your waistband attached on the inside. Alright, and this is the view from the outside of the skirt. The first thing we need to do is close off the ends of the waistband. So what we're going to do then is fold it backwards on itself, just like that. Alright. You can see the end there, the seam allowances. And then we're going to sew down there, right flush with the edge. Make sure that that is together. And then you can see, when turned in the right way, we'll be top stitching down the waistband like that. So we need to do the same thing on the other end of the waistband, although there's a little extra here. This is the overlap for where your button and buttonhole are. So just turn it back right at the end and using your 1 centimetre seam allowance there, and then you should still have an inch left for your overlap. So now we're going to turn out the ends of our waistband, nice and firmly on both ends. And then folding the waistband over along the crease, along the top that we made, and using this folded edge to just barely cover the stitch line from attaching the waistband. We're going to pin that in place so that we can then top stitch the waistband all the way around. So you're making sure that the seam allowance is facing upwards, and that pressed edge is just barely covering the seam. When you're round at the back of the skirt, make sure that your elastic is coming out the hole so that you don't end up losing it after you've shut the waistband. When you're sewing your waistband shut though, you want to make sure you're not sewing through your elastic as well. As you'll be sewing right along the edge in the seam allowance, you shouldn't catch it unless it's where it oughtn't to be. Okay, so now it's pinned in place all the way around. I'm going to go back to the machine, and then working from the right side of the fabric, we're going to top stitch right along the edge here. Alright, so when you get to this end, you just sew your two folded edges together down to the end, and this is where you're going to want to put your buttonhole. I'm going to put a snap on this one. It's going to be a gold snap, but if you were doing a buttonhole, now would be the time. You pop it just there. Okay, so there it is, been downstairs, hammered a snap on side, and while I was at it, just sewed a button on just on the edge of the opening. So you have your buttonhole there, and then you sew your button on right there, and then you can adjust your elastic and bring in the waist should you wish. Last thing to do is sew up the hem. So I'm just going to press under 1 inch all the way along this bottom hemline, all the way along the bottom hemline, and then we will sew it up. So there we have it all finished. There's hem sewn up and pressed, zip and press stud, and we've got the adjustable back waist. There you go. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to comment and I will answer as quickly as I can.